Under the relentless assault of the sun, the earth lay split and gasping, a skeletal reminder of life's fragility. Poker Alice cradled the water bucket against her, its weight, a familiar burden, while the sun seared through her dress, igniting her skin with a fiery kiss. Her dress whispered against the brittle grass, each step a dance with dust devils. The spring, once a wellspring of life, now barely wept a trickle. She had known the truth before setting out, yet hope, that cruel mistress, lured her from the safety of her cabin. The landscape sprawled around her, vast, barren, unforgiving. The only sounds were the wind's mournful song and the faint hum of unseen insects feasting on the silence. Midway back, a figure emerged, initially mistaken for a wounded beast, its form broken and dragging across the scorched earth. As she neared, the shape morphed into a man, his dark skin unlike any settler's, his breath shallow against the dirt. His attire was in tatters, stained with the dark bloom of blood, his black hair dusted with the earth he lay upon. An arrow, its shaft shattered, jutted from his thigh. Poker Less halted, her heart skipping a beat. A Navajo, her father's stern voice echoed in her mind, a warning of danger lurking behind such solitary figures. Logic urged retreat, yet her feet moved forward. The scent assaulted her senses, first the sharp tang of blood, the acrid sweat baked by the sun, and the bitter taste of fear. His lips were parched, his tongue a dry leaf against the roof of his mouth. His body, once a threat, now lay powerless before her. Yet her hands shook as she knelt beside him, her voice a whisper, "You got no right." "Stay with me, you hear," she whispered, with an urgency that seemed to hang in the air like a fragile shield. "Poker." Alice dipped her fingers into the warm water she carried, letting a few precious drops fall onto his parched lips. He recoiled slightly, a soft groan escaping at his battered chest, his eyelids fluttering in a dance of life and pain. "Don't you dare leave him after I've come all this way," she muttered, her voice a mix of desperation and defiance, as she unwound her scarf with trembling hands. With care, she tore a strip from it, pressing it against his deepest wounds, her face contorting with each gentle touch. The vast, unforgiving desert sprawled around them, its deceptive silence a false promise of safety. Poker Alice knew better than to trust its quiet. She had mere minutes, perhaps less, before the buzzard's circling would draw unwelcome attention. "Lord, give me strength," she gritted through clenched teeth, her plea as much a command as a prayer. Her legs ached, muscles screaming in protest from dragging him across the rugged terrain. She managed to reach the scant cover of scrub near the path, pausing to catch her breath, her chest heaving. Her cabin was still a distant mile away, an impossible journey with him in tow. The man stirred, his voice a low, ragged whisper. "Water," he croaked. "Already gave you some." She snapped, her voice tinged with panic and self-reproach. "What's the point of asking for what we're running out of?" Yet she tipped the pail once more, allowing him to sip from her cupped hand. His lips moved, forming a word unfamiliar to her ears, neither English nor Spanish. Was it a prayer or a curse? The sky darkened momentarily, a shadow passing overhead. Poker Alice's heart sank as she looked up to see just a hawk riding the thermals. But the omen was clear. Predators always circled the vulnerable. With a resolve she couldn't afford to question, she braced her shoulders under his weight, ready to haul him to safety. Amidst the toil and the strain, he staggered upright, each step a battle against collapse. The cabin, a testament to perseverance, finally loomed into sight, a humble, weathered structure pieced together by sheer will and whispered prayers. A faint wisp of smoke, like the last breath of a dying day, drifted from the chimney. With a determined kick, she flung open the trap door to the root cellar, the cool, dank air rising to meet them. As she maneuvered him into the darkness, his pained moans filled the space, but her resolve held firm. She nestled him beneath a quilt, dusty with time, ensuring his warmth before sealing him away with a thud that echoed her own heart's heavy beat. Exhausted, she slumped against the wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps, sweat blurring her vision, her hands now raw and marked by the ordeal trembling. As the sun sank lower, casting long, grasping shadows across the land, Poker Ellis, with her father's old rifle in hand, took her watch by the window. The world outside was a canvas of twilight, every whisper of the wind, every creak of a tree branch, setting her nerves on edge, vibrating like a wire stretched to its limit. "You better live, Navajo," she whispered fiercely, "or I swear I'll be haunting you on the other side." Sleep, when it came, was uninvited. One moment she was vigilant, the next, a deep, resonant vibration through the floorboards snapped her awake. Her heart, already racing, now seemed to leap into her throat. Peering through a sliver in the door, she saw them, a spectral line of horsemen rising from the dust, their presence as foreboding as the end of days. Feathers adorned their hair, their weapons spears and rifles, held with a casual menace. They circled the cabin in a slow, deliberate dance of encirclement, their horses silent as the graves seemed to understand the gravity of their mission. Poker Alice's heart thundered in her chest as she watched the men outside their horses stomping restlessly, snorting clouds of breath into the crisp morning air. The silence from the men was deafening and their intentions clear as the dawn. They were here for him, and they wouldn't leave until they had him. Her throat constricted, each swallow a painful effort as she tightened her grip on the rifle. Her mind raced with grim choices: bar the door, unleash a volley of shots, perhaps fell one of them before they overwhelmed her small sanctuary. Or she could step out alone, a solitary figure against the dawn, praying her kindness wouldn't be her undoing. "You did this, Poker," she thought, bitterness creeping into her resolve. "You gave water to a dying man, and now death itself comes knocking at your door." With trembling legs, she rose. The leader, a towering figure with a face painted in stark, bold colors, eyes as dark as obsidian, dismounted. He stood, a silent sentinel in the dust-laden air, a presence that seemed to resonate with the wild, ancient spirit of the land, long before any settler dared to cross its expanse. Poker, Alice inhaled deeply, the dry, brittle air scratching at her lungs, then pushed the door open. The sunrise at her back cast her silhouette in a dance of shadows against the weathered cabin walls. Her rifle, though heavy, was lowered. There was no point in starting a fight she knew she couldn't win. The leader watched her motionless. Her voice, when it came, was a rough whisper tinged with fear in the dust of the plains. "I ain't looking for trouble," she declared, her stance firm despite her shaking voice. "But if trouble's what you bring, know that I'll stand my ground." The warrior's response was a silent gesture, his hand raised, palm out, finger spread, an unfamiliar sign, yet it bore no hostility. From behind her in the dimness of the cellar, the wounded man stirred his faint groan, slicing through the tense air, drawing every eye toward the sound. Poker Alice clenched her jaw, her eyes narrowing as she faced the silent, imposing figures. "No sense in concealing the truth," she declared, stepping forward with a defiance that matched their unyielding gaze. "Do you desire him?" Her voice carried a challenge, a boldness that dared them to respond. "But first lend me your ears. He was on death's doorstep when I stumbled upon him, destined to be carrion without my intervention." The silence was palpable, heavy as iron chains around her neck. Poker stood firm. Her shoulders squared, her resolve as solid as the earth beneath her feet. "I'm prepared to surrender him, but not before I ensure his survival beyond the extraction of that arrow." A low, secretive murmur, like a river flowing beneath desert sands, rippled through the warriors. Their leader, his eyes dark and piercing, gave a sharp, decisive nod. Poker Alice exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding on to so tightly. Yet the dread within her didn't subside, not even slightly. Here, amidst dust and bloodshed, mercy was merely another gamble. Poker Alice had just placed her very life upon the betting table. The cold dawn wind whispered across her skin, raising goosebumps under her heavy coat. She stood, rifle in hand, confronting a dozen mounted warriors whose silence was as thick as the fog. The man at their helm watched her with the intensity of a hawk eyeing a wounded rabbit. His face adorned with stripes of white and red, and a necklace of polished bone hanging over his chest spoke of his authority. Lean, hardened, and utterly motionless, only the sharp, calculating glint in his eyes hinted at the life within. Behind her, the wounded Navajo let out another stifled groan from beneath the floorboards. If the warriors had missed it before, they certainly heard it now. With a deliberate, almost ceremonial grace, the lead warrior dismounted, standing a head taller than Poker Alice, his presence overwhelming in the stark morning light. His presence enveloped her like an inescapable tide, each wave pressing closer until it was almost suffocating. A single harsh word sliced through the tension, "Brother." Poker Alice's fingers tightened around the rifle, her body rigid with the instinct to flee, yet her mind knew better. Out here, fear was as dangerous as bleeding in the ocean among sharks. "I found him dying," she said, her voice a low, steady whisper. "I gave him water. I pulled out the arrow." Her gaze locked with the leader's, unwavering. "He ain't dead yet." The leader's eyes flicked to her rifle, then back to her face, a silent acknowledgement of her resolve. Slowly, he lowered his hand, palm outward, a signal for his men to stand down. A tall warrior with a face etched by time and feathers braided into his hair rode forward, speaking in a tongue Poker Alice couldn't comprehend. The leader listened, gave a curt nod, then returned his full attention to her. "You good woman," he said, his voice rough like gravel underfoot. "But he is ours." Poker Alice swallowed hard, her heart pounding against her ribs with such force she feared they might shatter. "You'll take care of him?" she asked, her voice catching, despite her efforts to keep it steady. The leader's expression didn't waver. "He is blood. Blood does not leave blood behind." The intensity in his tone, the fierce pride sent a chill down her spine, evoking memories of her father's solemn talks on family loyalty before the fever claimed him. Movement behind the warriors caught her eye. A second group, about 6 settlers on horseback, was approaching from the town's direction, dust rising in their wake, guns prominently slung across their saddles. Poker Alice's heart sank. They had spotted the Navajo riders too, and unlike her, they wouldn't waste time on words. Turning back to the leader, she stepped closer, urgency lacing her words. "Listen to me," she urged, her voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the weight of her plea. The warriors shifted their murmurs, growing hands hovering near their knives. The leader, however, remained still, his gaze piercing, waiting for her next words. With a sharp gesture, Poker Alice silenced the murmurs around her. "You got trouble coming," she pressed, her voice urgent. "Those men, they won't ask questions. They'll shoot first." The leader's jaw clenched tight, his hand instinctively dropping to the tomahawk at his belt. Poker Alice, caught in a moment of reckless desperation, thrust the rifle into his hands. His brow knotted, a mix of affront and admiration crossing his face. "You'll need it more than me," she said, her voice quivering. "But we ain't got to fight if we don't have to." The distant rumble of hooves grew into a deafening roar. The settlers were nearly upon them, their shouts cutting through the arid expanse. "There's engines at Boone's place. I see them load up, boys." Poker Alice's heart raced as she spun around. 6 men, rifles at the ready, charged towards them, their silhouettes casting long shadows against the blood-red smear of the sunrise. Turning back to the Navajo, she demanded, "You want to live?" Her voice was sharp, almost a snarl. "We fight together, or we all die alone." Time seemed to pause, the world holding its breath. Then with a grim, slow smile, the leader handed the rifle back. "You fight good," he said simply. Poker Alice chambered around, her resolve hardening. "I sure hope so." The Navajo warriors dispersed like specters, vanishing behind rocks and the gentle undulations of the land with a swiftness that sent chills down Poker Alice's spine. She sprinted to the side of the cabin, dropping to one knee. Her hands shook, but she steadied the rifle against her shoulder, pushing down the terror clawing at her. The settlers burst into view, their horses skidding to a halt, sending clouds of dust into the air. Their leader, a burly man with a crimson face and a battered shotgun, bellowed at her. "Boone, get inside!" With a resolute air, Poker Alice rose, her rifle aimed downward, yet primed for action. "They're not here to fight," she called out to her fellow settlers. "Let them take their wounded and leave us be." A harsh, mocking laughter erupted from the settlers, a sound as abrasive as sandpaper. Yuggin's soft boon. They jeered, implying that the Navajo were merely biding their time, ready to attack the moment the settlers turned their backs. Suddenly a shot pierced the air, a warning bullet kicking up dirt by Alice's feet. She flinched but held her ground, her stance unwavering. "Move aside, woman," the settler leader barked, his voice dripping with scorn. "Ain't no place for traitors in this valley." From behind her, another shot rang out, not aimed at the settlers, but into the sky, a sharp report that reverberated across the vast plain. The Navajo rifles glinting under the morning sun made their presence known. They were not many, but their numbers were enough to tip the scales. The tension was palpable, the air thick with the imminent threat of violence. "Don't be a damn fool, Poker." Alice's voice cut through the rising chaos. "If you start this fight, none of us will see tomorrow." But fear, that cruel usurper of reason, had already gripped the hearts of the settlers. A young twitchy man, barely more than a boy, his eyes wide with terror, raised his rifle. "Hold your fire!" The leader's command was drowned by the boy's premature shot. Though it missed its mark, the deed was done. The valley erupted into a cacophony of gunfire, the screams of horses, and the swirling dust that obscured Poker Alice's vision as she dove for cover behind a woodpile. Bullets whizzed overhead, tearing splinters from the cabin walls. Reacting on instinct, Alice fired back, not to kill, but to repel the attackers. The Navajo warriors, moving with the fluidity of wolves, flanked the settlers with terrifying precision. Through the chaos, Alice saw the young settler fall from his horse, clutching a wounded shoulder. Another horse galloped away riderless, while the leader, his face flushed with rage, struggled to rally his men. But panic, once unleashed, was a wild beast not easily tamed. Moment longer, his gaze piercing through her like the desert sun. Swift as wildfire devouring a parched barn, the settlers' resolve crumbled. They fled, their footsteps, a frantic drumbeat echoing their retreat to the safety of town. Courage, once their companion, now abandoned them to the mercy of the wind. The air, thick with the dust of their cowardice, hung heavy, punctuated only by the desperate gasps of horses and the faint clatter of their escape. Poker Alice, her heart, a wild stallion in her chest, lay motionless for a heartbeat, the world around her buzzing with the aftermath of gunfire. Rising with deliberate slowness, she faced the Navajo leader. Blood trickled from a shallow wound on his temple, a testament to the battle's closeness. He moved with the tranquil poise of one who dances with death daily, yet fears it not. He halted just paces from her, his eyes scanning her as if she were an enigma, indecipherable and intriguing. "You fight brave," he remarked, his voice as calm as the desert night. Poker Alice let out a sound that was part laugh, part cough. "Ain't it brave, just stupid," she replied, her voice rough with the dust of battle. A fleeting smile like a shadow flitted across his lips. A shout in their native tongue drew their attention to a warrior gesturing towards the cellar where the young Navajo she had saved now stirred, his eyes heavy with pain and confusion. His brother, or perhaps his blood brother, knelt by his side, whispering words of comfort. Poker Alice's heart clenched, a profound shift occurring within her, as ancient and unyielding as the earth beneath her feet. She knew then there was no return to the simplicity of town life, no slipping back into the role of a settler. Even survival wouldn't erase the brand of betrayal in their eyes. Yet watching the wounded man's hand clasp his brother's, feeling the pulse of life she had preserved, a fierce, unyielding pride surged within her. The Navajo leader faced her again. "You have no home here now," he stated, his words carrying the weight of truth, yet devoid of malice. Poker Alice nodded her acceptance, as firm as the ground she stood upon. "Never really did," she murmured, meeting his gaze with a steadiness that mirrored his own. After a long, contemplative moment, he gestured toward the vast open land that sprawled beyond the valley. "Come with us," he urged, not as a command nor a desperate plea, but as a sincere invitation. Alice glanced back at her cabin one last time. The broken shutters, the bullet-pocked walls, the silhouette of it all against the burgeoning dawn, it was more than mere shelter. Home was not defined by four walls and a roof. It was where you made your stand, where you decided whom to defend. With her rifle slung over her shoulder, she stepped forward with unwavering resolve. The warrior silent as the dawn parted to let her through. As she mounted a spare horse and rode out into the golden embrace of the morning light with them, Poker Alice realized she wasn't fleeing. No, she was riding towards something far more significant, something worth every ounce of her spirit. The smoke ascended behind them, a dark scar against the pastel sky, marking the place she once called home. Her horse navigated the shattered terrain with cautious steps, following the others in a close-knit line. Each hoofbeat stirred up small clouds of dust, the rhythm steady and almost trance-inducing. The Navajo warriors moved with a quiet urgency, their eyes fixed forward, never once looking back. Poker Ellis held her head high, resisting the urge to glance over her shoulder, though her heart ached with the weight of departure. What was left behind was nothing but ashes. She needed to remember that. Chaitan, the tall warrior who had first spoken to her, rode just ahead, his gaze sweeping the horizon. His presence was like a steadfast rock amidst the torrent of change around her. What did he make of this pale-skinned woman trailing trouble in her wake? Yet he hadn't turned her away. That was something. The wounded man she had saved, Chaitan's younger brother named Taza, rode slumped between two older warriors. His face drained of color, his teeth gritted against the pain. Poker Alice's eyes met his, a silent acknowledgement of the battle still to come. Could she truly make a difference here among these warriors? The question lingered as potent as the dust in the air as they rode into the uncertain but hopeful future. His gaze, once distant, now flickered with recognition. He didn't smile, but he dipped his head slightly, a gesture of gratitude that warmed her more than the ascending sun. Before them, the earth itself seemed to fracture, splitting into a labyrinth of rocky gullies and concealed ravines. This was prime territory for both refuge and resistance, should the need arise. The group slowed their pace, gathering in a hollow encircled by low, brooding stone outcrops. Chaitan dismounted, his voice a murmur as he conferred with he men. Poker Alice slid from her horse, her knees buckling slightly under the weight of exhaustion, yet her pride held her spine as straight as an arrow. They needed rest. They needed a plan. Poker Alice knew this as surely as she knew her own name. Trouble wasn't something that simply smoldered away with their burning cabin. It pursued like a relentless bloodhound, sniffing out every trace. One of the warriors, his face marked by a jagged scar, handed her a canteen without a word. Poker. Alice accepted it, nodding her thanks, and drank deeply. The water was lukewarm and carried the faint taste of leather, yet to her parched throat it was sweeter than the finest wine. Chaitan approached, his rifle slung casually across his back, arms folded. He studied her with that same appraising gaze he had when they first met. "You fight settlers," he stated, as if trying to fit the pieces of her puzzle together. Poker Alice wiped her mouth and gave a nonchalant shrug. "Fought men who'd kill anyone they didn't understand." "Seems fair," she replied. He grunted, a sound caught between amusement and skepticism. "You leave your world," he continued, his voice devoid of malice, just stating a fact. "Now you have no world." His words settled like a heavy mantle on her shoulders. Poker Alice exhaled slowly, thoughts drifting to the little church in town, to the whispering women, to the men who spat at her father for marrying a half-Mexican woman before he died. She remembered the narrow, pinched faces of judgment, the silent accusations. What world had she left behind? And what new world was she stepping into? In the dim light filtering through curtained windows, she stood, her gaze lost in the distance. "I didn't belong to that world," she confessed, her voice a mere whisper, yet carrying the weight of 1,000 untold stories. Chaitan, his expression softening momentarily, the edges of his lips, hinting at a smile, quickly turned somber. "More settlers will come," he warned, his voice as sharp as the unsheathed blade at his side. "With guns, with fire." His gaze flicked to the wounded Taza, then back to Poker. Alice, his eyes hardening with resolve. "They want war." Poker Alice felt her jaw clench, a fire igniting within her. "Then we give them a war they'll never forget," she declared, her voice rising above the murmur of the wind. Across the hollow, the warriors sprang into action, their movements a symphony of preparation. Rifles, checked blades, sharpened wounds bound with precision. She watched a strange, fierce energy rising like a tide within her. Poker Alice, not born a warrior, had learned the hard lessons of survival, to skin a deer with deft hands, to shoot with deadly accuracy, to mend her garments with fingers stained by her own blood. Here in this unforgiving land, these skills were not mere tools, but weapons of survival. Smoke curled on the breeze, not from the fire they had left behind, but fresh too much for a simple cooking fire. Poker Alice's stomach twisted with dread. Chayton sensing the same tense beside her. "They come," he murmured, his voice barely a breath. There was no time for eloquent speeches, no time for plans etched in the dirt. The warriors moved with the fluidity of a single deadly organism. Poker Alice, her heart pounding like war drums, grabbed her rifle and followed them into the jagged embrace of the rocks. The settlers arrived on horseback, a dozen strong, their approach heralded by clouds of dust. Barton Clay led them, his face contorted with rage, a battered rifle cradled against his saddle, as if it were his most cherished possession. Hiding behind a boulder, Poker Alice pressed her back against the cool stone, her palms slick against the rough wood of her rifle. The world narrowed to the rhythm of her heartbeat and the trembling of the earth beneath the hooves. A silent signal passed among the Navajo, a subtle hand gesture, a knowing nod. Poker. Alice absorbed it all, her senses heightened, ready for the storm that was about to break. As the settlers stormed into the hollow, their voices thundered with curses and threats that echoed off the ancient stone. Chayton, with his rifle raised high and hands open, stepped forward, a silent offer, a fleeting chance for peace. Yet Barton Clay, with a sneer, spat into the dust. "You hiding behind savages now. Boone, you always were too soft to survive." He bellowed, his voice dripping with disdain. From behind cover, Poker Alice emerged, her rifle steady, her voice cutting through the cacophony like a knife. "Turn back, Clay," she commanded, her tone as sharp as the edge of her weapon. "You ain't wanted here." Laughter, a ripple of mockery, spread among the settlers. "You think you can scare us, girl?" Barton sneered back, his eyes narrowing. "You're alone." But then, as if conjured from the very shadows of the rocks, Chayton's warriors rose together, their rifles gleaming ominously in the dim light. Barton's bravado faltered, his face paling under the sudden shift in power. "Last chance, Poker." Alice declared, her rifle leveled, her gaze unwavering. For a moment, time itself seemed to pause, every breath held in anticipation. Then, in a moment of cowardice, Barton Clay did what cowards always do. He fired. His shot, wild and desperate, missed its mark but tore through the thin veil of civility. The hollow erupted in chaos. Rifles cracked like whips, their reports rolling through the hollow like thunder. Horses panicked, screamed, and bolted, their hooves pounding the earth. Settlers scrambled for cover, diving behind rocks as dust and gunpowder filled the air. Poker Alice, with a calm born of necessity, squeezed the trigger. A settler yelped, dropping his weapon, clutching at his bleeding hand. Bullets whined past her so close she felt the heat of their passage. She ducked, reloaded with practiced ease, and fired again. Chayton moved through the fray like a specter, swift and unforgiving. A settler driven by desperation charged with a hatchet. Chayton sidestepped his rifle's butt, meeting the man's skull with a sickening thud. Amidst the chaos, Poker Alice sought refuge behind a fallen log, her shots kicking up dust around her. A bullet grazed her arm, leaving a trail of fire. She stifled a cry, her teeth gritted against the pain. Across the field, Barton Clay, now a shadow of his former arrogance, tried to rally his scattered men, waving them forward like a drunken general. Poker Alice, with a sniper's precision, lined up her shot. Barton, spotting her too late, met her bullet head-on. With a flick of his wrist, he sent the hat spinning into the dirt, a defiant gesture in the face of chaos. Barton hit the ground, crawling desperately for any semblance of cover. The settlers, their courage shattered, scrambled onto their horses, pulling the wounded with them in a frantic escape. Poker Alice, her rifle slowly lowering, chest heaving with exertion, stood amidst the aftermath. The silence that followed was more oppressive than the thick gun smoke hanging in the air. Bodies, both settlers and their loyal steeds, lay strewn across the blood-soaked earth. Poker Alice rose her arms streaked with blood, her gaze fixed on the survivors as they vanished over the ridge. Chaiton approached, his expression inscrutable. "You fight good," he remarked this time with a note of respect threading through his words. Poker Alice surveyed the weary, bloodied figures around her, her heart throbbing not just with fatigue and pain, but with a fierce surge of pride. She had fought not for mere land or vanity, but for something deeper, for loyalty, for the very essence of life itself. The sun climbed higher, casting golden light over the blood-reddened rocks. Smoke from her charred cabin ascended into the crisp sky. Chaiton's touch on her shoulder and was a rare sign of camaraderie. "Come, we leave," he urged. Poker Alice nodded, the lump in her throat a testament to the gravity of her decision. She wasn't fleeing. She was stepping forward through the flames into a new dawn. Gathering her scant belongings, she followed the warriors into the rising sun, her eyes never glancing back. The past was but ashes now. The future, whatever it held, would be forged in fire and dust. The wind whispered through the ruins where Poker Alice's cabin once stood, stirring the ashes. Nothing remained but charred beams and fragments of glass half swallowed by the earth. She watched the smoke trail dissipate into the vast blue expanse, a final breath of a life she had outgrown. Around her, the warriors moved with a deliberate calm, tending to the wounded, soothing their horses, their voices low and patient. Here in this unforgiving land, patience was a lesson learned the hard way. Every motion was measured, every step taken with the precision of a ritual, as if the very ground beneath their feet would exact retribution for any slip of carelessness. Chaiton knelt beside Taza, his hands moving with tender care over his brother's wounds. The younger man's breath came more easily now. The fever that had once threatened his life, now vanquished. The peril had receded, though not entirely vanished. Poker Alice, seated cross-legged a short distance away, meticulously cleaned her rifle. Each stroke was deliberate, a meditative act that anchored her amidst the storm of emotions swirling within. Her eyes met Chaiton's across the space between them, a silent exchange where no words were necessary. There was no judgment in his gaze, no trace of pity, only a profound recognition. She had battled fiercely, stood steadfast, and bled for them. In this moment, Poker Alice felt a profound sense of belonging, yet paradoxically, she was bound to no one but the land itself. As the sun dipped lower, bathing the landscape in a cascade of molten gold, the warriors readied themselves to depart. They would not tarry where death had so recently tread. This truth resonated deep within Poker Alice. With footsteps as soft as whispers on the dust, Chaiton approached. "You ride with us," he declared, his voice carrying the certainty of an already settled decision. Poker Alice nodded, the weight of his words both a burden and a buoy to her spirit. She secured her rifle to her back, standing to join him, her resolve firming with each step. The group moved out as twilight enveloped the land, their formation loose yet purposeful across the rugged terrain. The silence was profound, the only sounds the soft murmur of their horses' hooves on the hard earth, the creaking of leather, and the gentle clink of bridles. They rode until the sky was a tapestry of cold, distant stars. The world seemed to contract to the steady rhythm of breath, the whisper of the wind through the scrub. At a secluded spring hidden away, they halted. Fires were out of the question, too risky, with hostile eyes possibly scanning the horizon. Thus they dined in silence, the cool night air wrapping around them like a cloak. As the night deepened, Poker Alice sat a little apart from the others, her gaze fixed on the stars above. They blazed, fiercely white and bright, scattered across the sky like grains of salt tossed carelessly by some cosmic hand. She recalled nights spent by her cabin, her heart full of wishes whispered to those silent, distant lights, wishes that had gone unanswered. Yet now she felt no need for such fleeting desires. Her will was her compass, guiding her through the darkness. Chaiton approached, his movements fluid and natural, a testament to his affinity with the untamed lands. He settled beside her, his voice a soft rumble in the quiet night. "You've chosen a difficult path." Poker Alice's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. There's no other kind worth walking, she replied, her voice steady despite the weight of her decision. He nodded, his gaze intense, scrutinizing her in a way that made her pulse quicken. Tomorrow we venture deeper into the mountains. It's rough terrain, but it's ours. I'll keep pace, she declared, her voice fierce, betraying her resolve. A shadow of a smile flitted across his face. I know you will. Silence enveloped them then as the stars wheeled slowly overhead and the night whispered its secrets. When sleep finally embraced Poker Alice, it was not the light, restless slumber of anxiety, but a profound, dreamless rest, secured by the certainty of her chosen path. Dawn shattered the tranquility with the urgency of a scout's breathless report. Riders approached not settlers but soldiers from the fort, spurred by rumors of the recent skirmish. There was no luxury of time for a strategic withdrawal. The warriors sprang into action, their movements swift and decisive. Poker Alice adjusted the stress of her saddle, her hands sure and swift, her rifle within easy reach. Every sense heightened by the rush of adrenaline. Chayton positioned himself beside her. Stay close. If you see a chance, take it and run, he urged. Her head shook with a firm refusal. I'm through running from cowards, she declared, her eyes locking with his. For a heartbeat, he studied her, then offered a solemn nod, a silent salute from one warrior to another. The soldiers appeared on the ridge, their banners fluttering defiantly in the morning breeze, their rifles catching the harsh light of the sun. They lined up ready to descend into the fray. Poker Alice sensed the ominous line of soldiers stretching like a sinister barrier across the mouth of the valley, sealing off the path to freedom. The familiar icy tendrils of fear began to coil around her stomach, but she steeled herself against it. No longer would fear dictate her actions. She had been its prisoner once. Never again. The signal from Chayton was sharp, a crisp command slicing through the tension. His warriors' embodiments of the land itself melted into the landscape, moving with the stealth of shadows. Poker Alice followed suit, her body low, every heartbeat thundering in her ears like the drumbeat of war. The soldiers' calls for surrender were harsh, their voices a cacophony of command. Bart and Clay, riding alongside, their faces contorted with malice, pointed at her, their accusations slicing through the air. There she is, the traitor. String her up. Chayton's glance was a silent question, tinged with regret. But Poker Alice, her resolve as firm as the mountains around her, answered with the language of defiance. Her rifle spoke first, its retort echoing through the valley. The first soldier recoiled, his cry piercing the air as his weapon fell with a clatter. The line of soldiers wavered, their confidence shaken. Then, like wolves descending on prey, the warriors struck. They used the terrain, the rocks and ravines, as extensions of their will. Gunfire erupted, a symphony of cow and smoke that enveloped the valley. Poker Alice, amidst the fray, moved with a predator's grace. Her senses were sharpened to a fine edge, each shot deliberate, each movement calculated. She kept Taza and the others in her peripheral vision, a guardian amidst the storm. She caught sight of Barton Clay, his face a mask of rage as he tried to rally his faltering troops. Her aim was steady, her breath even. When she fired, it was not vengeance that guided her, but the cold hand of justice. Clay's scream as the bullet tore through his shoulder was swallowed by the tumult, his body crumpling to the ground. The soldiers' formation disintegrated under the relentless assault, their resolve crumbling like the dust they stirred. Some fled, their boots pounding the earth in retreat, while others, their spirits broken, dropped their weapons and raised trembling hands in surrender. The battle ceased abruptly, leaving behind a breathless silence, thick with the residue of violence. Poker Alice, her limbs heavy with exhaustion, rose unsteadily, her eyes stinging from the smoke, her muscles screaming from the effort. Nearby, Chayton stood, his presence a silent testament to the day's brutal dance of survival and retribution. Blood trickled from a shallow graze across his ribs, yet he was alive. His warriors, though battered, stood around him in a triumphant circle. Taza, limping and leaning on a staff, approached Poker Alice. "You fight like a spirit, woman," he said, his voice rich with admiration. Poker Alice, despite the pain, managed to smile. Just stubborn, she replied with a wry grin. The defeated soldiers, their weapons confiscated, were sent back to the fort on foot, their pride wounded as deeply as their bodies. The warriors, in turn, prepared to delve deeper into the wildernesses where no army would dare to pursue. For now, they had secured a moment of freedom. As the morning sun ascended, Poker Alice climbed a ridge overlooking the battlefield. Below, smoke wisped languidly into the brightening sky. The valley, wide and scarred, bore the marks of fire and blood, yet it stood resilient, much like her. Chayton joined her in silence. Together they observed the land's slow, stubborn healing, a testament to the enduring spirit of all wild things. "You have a name with us now," Chayton finally spoke. "Kiona for the Brown Hills. Strong, steady, Poker." Alice felt a lump in her throat. She had no words, only a solemn nod, accepting the name with the gravity it deserved. The wind picking up tugged at her hair, sweeping away the remnants of her old life. She was uncertain of what lay ahead, hardship, hunger, perhaps even death. But she knew she would face it head-on, standing tall. Out here, survival was the only law. In Poker, Alice, now Kiona, had proven herself more than worthy. As the warriors mounted their horses and rode into the heart of the untamed land, Poker Alice, with her rifle slung across her back and her heart fierce and free, followed. The dust kicked up by their horses swallowed their trail, erasing the past, leaving only the raw, untamed future ahead waiting for her. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the wilderness of survival and spirit. If this tale has stirred your soul or sparked your imagination, please leave a comment below, like this video, share it with those who might appreciate its message, or subscribe to our channel for more stories that touch the heart and challenge the spirit. Your engagement is the wind beneath our wings, carrying us forward into the wild, uncharted futures we explore together.